everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Punctuation. Today we are going to be looking at different ways that you can use a comma. I've done a video already on when not to use a comma because I think that is one of the most common mistakes that people use in their writing. Once you've got that sorted, you might be thinking, well, okay, I need some hard and fast rules of when it is okay. And so I'm going to talk you through 3 of the most kind of common ways that we can use a comma accurately. The first thing to remember is that a comma is there just to help your reader make sense of your sentences. They're there to separate out important bits of information or not so important bits of information, and to help your reader make sense of longer, complex sentences and ideas. So they're really, really helpful. So let's start with the most basic use of the comma, and that is separating items in a list. Items or actions in a list. So if we start with separating items, I'm going to give you a sentence. I'm going to tell you what I'm frightened of. And this is true. True story. I'm frightened of pigs, jellyfish, and earwigs. Really am. Really genuinely quite frightened of those things. Now, where do the commas go? So in a list, you're going to separate out the items. The only place that you don't need a comma is between the last 2. So in this case, it would be, I am frightened of pigs, comma, jellyfish, and earwigs. Now, if we wanted to make that list longer, we'd need another one. So I am frightened of pigs, comma, pigeons, comma, jellyfish, and earwigs. I'm not frightened of pigeons. I just don't really like them. So that is literally separating out items in a list. It's easy peasy. You can do the same thing, but with actions. So if you have a list of actions, you're going to do the same, separating out with a comma. So for example, I like eating chocolate, comma, reading Harry Potter, and listening to music. Same idea. So items in the list, separated with a comma, with the exception of the last 2 when you just use your connective. And easy peasy, basic way of using a comma. Now on to slightly harder stuff. So another way that you can use commas is to separate out phrases and clauses that are used at the beginning of sentences. It can even be one word, like an adverbial. So here's an example. Shockingly, a pig chased me through the farm. Okay, so shockingly is your adverbial, and because I've put it at the beginning of the sentence, it needs to be marked out with a comma. So shockingly, comma, a pig chased me through the farm. Not a true story. Now, another thing that you might do is use a little phrase. So maybe something that indicates time. So let's take this one. Later that day, comma, I ate a bacon sandwich. Later that day is your little adverb of time. Actually, it works as a little discourse marker, but because it's at the beginning of the sentence, you mark it out with a comma. And then the last one that I want to talk to you about is when you put a subordinate clause at the beginning of a sentence. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by a subordinate clause, do go and have a little look at my video about sentence construction. Basically, a complex sentence is made up of a main clause and a subordinate clause, and you can swap around which way that you want to have them. So if the subordinate clause comes at the end of the sentence, you don't necessarily need a comma, but if it goes at the beginning, you do. So for example, when I go swimming, comma, I always check for jellyfish. When I go swimming is a subordinate clause. It doesn't stand alone. It doesn't work as a sentence in its own right, whereas I always check for jellyfish is. If I did it the other way round, I always check for jellyfish when I go swimming, I wouldn't need a comma. But because I've put the subordinate clause at the beginning of the sentence, I do. When I go swimming, comma, I always check for jellyfish. So to sum up that rule, whether it is a one-word adverbial, a little phrase, or a subordinate clause, if you're putting it at the beginning of the sentence, you need to separate it with a comma. The last way that you can use a comma that I'm going to talk to you about today is when you use a comma to wrap up embedded clauses. Now, there's a really good way of seeing whether or not you've got an embedded clause or phrase in your sentence, and therefore whether or not you need commas. So I'm going to give you an example. The sea, comma, which was teeming with jellyfish, comma, was no longer invited. So which was teeming with jellyfish? That's the clause, that's the embedded clause. And what I'm doing is I'm plonking it into the middle of the sentence. And that's why I'm wrapping it up. It's almost like it's a little sandwich. If you were to take that clause out of the sentence, it would still make sense because you'd be left with the sea was no longer inviting. That's the sentence, that's the main sentence. But I'm giving a little bit more information, and because I'm plopping it into the sentence after the noun, the sea, it needs to be wrapped up in commas. So the sea, comma, which was teeming with jellyfish, comma, was no longer inviting. Okay, that's 3 ways of using a comma accurately. Hopefully that was helpful. Do have a little look at the video on when not to use a comma and the videos on basic structures, sentence structures, because it will really help with your understanding. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so, because then you'll be aware of all of the videos coming up. And do have a little look at the playlists on my channel as well to see if there's anything helpful there for, well, any part of your study of literature or language. Anyway, that's it from me. Happy writing, happy revising, happy punctuation. Bye.